Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be hearing some paranormal stories from Japan. Very creepy. I'd also like to thank J Nightmares for joining us today and actually providing all the stories, so give him a big thank you. You can find a link to his channel at the end of the video and in the description. Final note, huge thank you to everyone who is contributing to the app campaign, link in the description, and it really means a lot to me if you want to contribute. Thanks guys, but for now it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. A few years back, I was working for a company. I would put so many work hours in an attempt to climb the career ladder, and all of those hours were unpaid, of course. I used to use my lunch breaks to catch up on sleep. It became routine for me to pull into a quiet area, eat lunch, read a bit, and have a sleep. In my evenings, I would always visit clients, and that meant that from lunchtime till early evening, my bosses assumed I was traveling. It was a little dishonest to sleep on the job, but I was so tired from working overtime, and my company were ignoring the labor standards law. I never managed to sleep deeply in the car, so I guess that's why sleep paralysis soon found me. It was a cold day in December when it happened. I was en route to a client's, and I found a great area to pull into to take a nap. I found a vacant plot of land by a dam, a blind spot from the highway behind some bushes, ate, reclined the seat, and read. And before I knew it, I was asleep. When I opened my eyes, the LCD display screen in my car displayed a track and the time. It was 6:05 p.m. and I think Radiohead were playing. I remember thinking, "Oh, you idiot, you overslept." I went to put my chair back into position, but I couldn't. I couldn't move. My body felt heavy, and the atmosphere in the car was dark. My eyes were fixed on the windscreen. I could see something dark in the upper hand right side of the windscreen. It was a shadow of a human hand. The time changed on the LCD display to 6:06. My eyes hurt for some reason. I looked back to where the hand was, and there was now a shadowy head peering down at me. I couldn't make out any facial features. It was just a black silhouette, with one hand resting in the middle of the windshield. It was staring at me. Even though I couldn't see its eyes, I knew that it was just staring at me, observing me like I was a fish in a fish tank. While it was staring at me, I felt intense feelings of anger and unbearable waves of sadness. I'd heard stories about people feeling these feelings when in proximity to the paranormal, but I'd never believed it. It's like you sense someone's final emotions. It was unexplainable. I couldn't move. I was just face to face with this dark shadow. I was asking myself if I was asleep or not, and was trying to figure out what the shadow was. A lot was happening. All the while the shadow was staring at me without a single form of slight movement. I had the ability to move my eyes, but suddenly I was unable to. All of the surrounding colors in the car and outside the windows faded away. I couldn't see my book anymore, and the LCD clock disappeared. I was slipping into darkness. It was terrifying. Then I heard a knock. It was against the window. My fear was now at its peak. I still couldn't move, and now something was trying to get in, or at least make its presence known. Then I realized that it was a knocking sound. Hearing it louder the second time, I was suddenly freed from the bounds of sleep paralysis. It was bright out, and I looked at the clock. It was 2:30, nowhere near the 6:05 p.m. I saw earlier. I heard the knock again. It wasn't part of the nightmare, though, I had just been through. I looked out of the window and saw two shadows. The sunlight was obscuring their faces. I put my window down and shielded my eyes. Two police officers were stood in front of me. One looked 30, the other 50. They announced themselves. I was disoriented and a bit on edge, so perhaps I was a bit rude, and said something like, "What's the problem?" "What are you doing here?" the older officer replied. "I was just taking a nap." "What's wrong? Is this private land or something? I didn't mean to trespass." "No, that's not the problem. As you know, we're in a recession at the moment. You come here to this place alone? We're just making sure you're not doing anything stupid." I asked him what he was implying. "Sir, have you come here to take your own life?" I told him honestly that I just pulled over because I'd been so tired at work, but I wasn't going to do anything like that, and I apologized for giving them that impression. I could have never been ready for his response. "Sir, with the greatest of respect, we saw what you were doing in your car. You were strangling yourself to the point that your eyes rolled back. Are you sure nothing's wrong?" I was completely floored by this statement. After a while, I managed to convince myself that I was going to be okay, and said that I would get some rest, and they wouldn't have to worry about me, and that I wouldn't be coming back. I got out of there as fast as I could and headed back to the office. I called the client and asked if they were okay with a phone consultation, and they were. I didn't want to be alone. I left that damn area feeling truly terrified. Since that day, I didn't want to take naps in my car again. Every time I would feel tired, I would just remember that shadow and what the officer said I had been doing in my car. I slipped into a light form of depression due to lack of sleep, stress, and it was affecting my work. I was the bottom performer. Within a month of seeing the shadow on my windshield, I left my job, and no one complained or cared. I was saving myself from being fired, to be honest. I didn't know what that shadow was, but recently I'm not so sure if it was paranormal or not. I just think I had a scary dream brought on by my tiredness and the state of mental health at the time. At least, I tell myself that. For better or worse, it got me to leave my company and prioritize my health. I'm a bit frightened that the shadow will come back one day if I enter another period of unhappiness in my life. My physical and mental health wasn't that good. That's perhaps why sleep paralysis came for me. To anyone out there listening, take care of yourself if you can relate. Mental health and a work-life balance are important and underrated.
At my school, there's an unused classroom we call the desk graveyard. What that means is that it's basically a storage room with a huge amount of desks in it. There are lots of rumors about the desk graveyard. It's said that sometimes you can hear certain sounds coming from the desk graveyard, even when there isn't anyone in there. Since the desk graveyard was on the first floor, we guessed the noise was coming from the second floor. The library is above it though, and the sounds we would hear from it would be running, rummaging, and thumping. Since students wouldn't be in the library whilst we were in regular class time, we started to wonder just what was going on in the desk graveyard. One time, this kid from my class had something wrong with his desk. It was wobbling or something. He was told by the teacher to go and exchange it. He said that when he got to the desk graveyard, he heard the same sounds we had all heard, but up close. I was tempted to think it was an earthquake or something, but the kid was adamant it wasn't. He quit picking out a new desk and hurried back to class. He came back white as a ghost and convinced something paranormal was going on in that room. It's so weird that no one ever goes in there. Not even the cleaner. Since no one goes in there, I guess it doesn't really need to be cleaned all that often. But once the cleaner was cleaning the corridor in front of it, and he said that he heard a horrible rattling sound coming from in there. He thought maybe it was the wind, but the windows were closed. The cleaner at our school had been there for a very long time. He was actually a former student. I asked him what he knew about the desk graveyard. And he said, even when he was a kid, the same room was used for storing desks and nothing more. And no one was allowed in there without good reason too. He said that there were similar rumors about that room when he was a boy. I don't know the truth of this matter, but what he told me chilled me to the bone and made me never want to go into the desk graveyard alone again. He said that before it was used to store desks, and before it was even a building, there was a pond in its place. When the school was built on these grounds, a decision was made to fill in the pond. It wasn't a big pond, but it was an incredibly deep pond. In days gone by, a young girl lost her life in the murky depths of the pond. Therefore, the kids, who the cleaner went to school with, all blamed the noises and strange goings-on on a ghost. The ghost of the girl who lost her life in the pond. I often wonder aloud what that little girl is trying to communicate, if anything. Are you just trying to make us aware of your existence? And you just want to let us know that you're there? Or are you still wanting to play with some children of your age? Either way, I don't want to go anywhere near the desk graveyard. It makes me nervous.
This is a creepy story that happened when my friends and I were attempting to go on a paranormal adventure. We'd heard a few rumors about this place out in the middle of nowhere, an abandoned amusement park. They said the amusement park was haunted. Apparently, after it went bust, the owner took his own life by hanging himself from it. Rumors had it that they found his hanging body, lifeless, attached to the Ferris wheel. Apparently, the Ferris wheel will now move by itself at night, so naturally we wanted to see if this was true. One of my friends, who said he can sense the presence of spirits, really wanted to go, but two of my other friends required a bit more persuasion. We wanted to go at night, since it would be creepier that way. We had difficulty finding the location. It truly was in the middle of nowhere. It was in the mountains. I remember as we were driving up that we didn't pass any other cars on the roads. Finally, we found the abandoned amusement park at 2 a.m. I decided to park the car in a nearby hotel parking lot, since the roads to the amusement park were in rather bad shape. We could walk down that desolate road, and it would make the experience all the creepier. I had just parked the car, and everyone was taking their seatbelts off. Then we heard it, the unmistakable sound of knocking on the passenger side window. My friend, who said he could sense the presence of spirits, was sat in the passenger seat of my car. My car, which only moments ago was filled with laughter and excitement, fell silent. It was really eerie. None of us said a word. It was 2 a.m. We were in the middle of the mountains and we hadn't passed anyone on the drive up, and the hotel parking lot was empty. We all knew that it was impossible for a person to knock on the window and run off into the shadows without any of us spotting them. I looked out the window, and there was nothing but darkness all around us. It was awful. The tension was like one of those horror films where you know a jump scare is only seconds away. I was sweating, and didn't want to be the one to break the silence. My friend in the passenger seat just turned to me and said, "Let's get out of here." Just then, another knock came from the rear of the car. I glanced in the mirror and didn't see anything. I thought it could have been a stone hitting the car, but it sounded like a very deliberate knock. I was very, very cautious when I pulled away. I didn't want to get into an accident, and really felt that there was some kind of presence out there just watching us. I drove very carefully until we got to a nearby convenience store. Beneath the lights and in the safety of the convenience store, we all felt less frightened by what had happened, and we began to talk about it. My spiritual friend then said, "That was a warning. Something was out there telling us to turn back for sure. Do not leave the car. I think it's still with us." We drove further and further from those awful mountains, and I don't know how to explain it, but the air in the car shifted. We all felt better, like when you've given your presentation that you've been worried about for ages. It was now behind us. We got out of the car to inspect, and found several scratches on the passenger side door. From that day onwards, we promised to one another that we would not go ghost hunting again. Some things don't want to be hunted. Or maybe, some things won't be hunted. They'd rather hunt you. I can only imagine what would have happened if we had left that car and gone in search of the amusement park.
I used to work in Tokyo, and I lived there with my family. But around 2 years ago, I became quite ill, and I was hospitalized. Due to this illness, I lost my job. I guess that's what incentivized my wife to divorce me as well. I have 2 daughters. I can't afford to take care of them currently, so they're being raised by my ex-wife. I'm so ashamed and sorry that I can't even keep up my child support payments. I was finally out of hospital when this all happened. I moved back to my hometown to get my medical treatment. Sounds good, doesn't it? Go back home, receive some medical treatment. But the truth is, I returned penniless to my aging parents. I knew I didn't have a good reputation in my family and with my neighbors. I couldn't do anything for leisure since I didn't have any money, so I just started to go fishing. I had a rod from my high school days. It wasn't in great condition, but it was fine for me. I spent my days fishing by a river in my neighborhood. Then last month, one morning I was fishing. I was there late. It started to get dark. I hadn't caught anything, and I was just thinking of packing up and heading home, when I raised my rod and found that something was hooked. I reeled in my line. I pulled out a soaking wet doll. It was about 15 centimeters in size. It was a cloth doll with long woolly hair. It looked as if it was stuffed with cotton. A little girl's doll for sure. As soon as I saw it, I was struck with powerful nostalgia. Memories from 30 years ago came rushing back to me. I knew that doll. It belonged to a girl I used to play with. Her name was Mickey. She lived about 100 meters from my parents' home. Her house was quite shabby, and since it's been knocked down and a supermarket parking lot's in its place, I used to hear her alcoholic father shouting at her. Her hair and her clothes were always dirty. I don't think her father ever provided for her properly. Back then, I never saw her without this doll. She never went to kindergarten. She used to always be waiting for me on the way home. She would call out, "Hey big bro, come play with me." I remembered all of this while staring at the water-soaked doll. I knew for a fact it was her doll, because I was the one who threw it into the river. When I finished kindergarten, I went into school, and some of my new elementary school friends made fun of me for playing with Mickey. She would be waiting for me in her raggedy clothes, asking me to come play with her in front of my friends. I just ignored her. She silently walked back to her home. She didn't approach me. After this, she didn't approach me when I was with my new friends. She would just look at me, holding her doll, and go back into her house. Mickey looked very raggedy as the days went by. Her eyes seemed to plead with me as I walked by with my friends. Mickey's appearance progressively went downhill around this point. Her father had a reputation around town of running up bar tabs and dashing before paying. Because of his reputation, my parents didn't want me to play with Mickey anymore. One day, I was playing baseball or something with my friends by the riverbank I was now fishing on. Mickey was watching us playing, sat cross-legged with her doll, just off to the side, lying on the grass. My friends were all making fun of me, teasing me about her, so I just shouted at her in anger, "Go home, Mickey!" I guess she didn't hear me, because she was smiling and looking my way. My friends continued to tease me. This angered me so much I ran over and snatched up her doll and threw it into the river. It flew over the grass bank, but at the time I didn't know if it landed in the water. Mickey saw what I had done, looked at me with eyes welling with tears, and frowned as she walked away. About a month later, Mickey died. It was unknown how she died, but rumor around town was she had been beaten to death by her alcoholic father. It all came back to me as I was holding her doll, her only cherished possession. How could this doll be here after 30 years? It can't be possible. And I swear, as I was looking at that doll, I heard a voice call, "Hey, big bro, let's go play." I spun around to look, but no one was there. I dropped the doll, and it sank like a stone into the murky depths of the river. It disappeared from sight almost instantly. I left the riverbank immediately, feeling so terribly sad and alone. I just had to get away from there. I decided to search for Mickey's grave. I had never visited it. I felt so bad about how I treated the poor girl. I went home and asked my mother if she might know where Mickey's grave was. She did know, and I set off. Her grave was a small pile of natural stones. I guess her father couldn't afford a headstone, or had to choose between the alcohol and an appropriate memorial. It hadn't been well maintained either. I guess that's because her father was now in jail. I put my hands together to pray and shut my eyes. The sounds of summer faded until the whole area around me was eerily quiet. The cicadas stopped calling. It was silent. I opened my eyes, and a small black figure emerged from behind Mickey's stone grave, and it stood before me. Then I heard, "Do your best, big brother." I guess it could have all been a hallucination. I wasn't well, and I had a lot on my mind, but it felt so real. I thought about my 2 daughters on the way home. I have to do my best for them. Then I thought about buying a big doll for Mickey and leaving it at her grave.
This happened when I was on a business trip to Los Angeles. I was staying about an hour's drive from the airport in a place called Anaheim, not too far from Disneyland. It was a pretty nice area, and it seemed safe at night too. There were 24-hour convenience stores and good-looking restaurants right by my motel. It was great. I had no problem with the location. I had a problem with the hotel I was staying in. The clerk on the front desk was very nice, but the second I checked into my room, literally the second I touched the keycard to the sensor on the door, something didn't sit right with me. I had a very uncomfortable feel about the room. The hotel room was fine, nice in fact for a business trip. It was just a normal single bed. There was nothing wrong with it, just I didn't like it. I didn't want to be there. I couldn't put my finger on why though. I didn't let it bother me at the time. I went downstairs to grab some dinner in a nearby restaurant. After that, I headed back to my room to go over my notes for the presentation that I would be making the next day. I guess that my initial apprehension to the room was brought on by my work nerves. I was immersed in my preparation when I heard a noise, a creak. I turned my head in the direction of a sound and watched as the bathroom door slowly opened by itself. It felt as if someone were opening it, as if for me to enter, inviting me in, like I was being beckoned. My spine froze. It scared me. I had never experienced anything like this before. My brain went into problem-solving mode. I guess that my senses were heightened because I was in a new place I wasn't used to. For instance, there might be a breeze in the bathroom or a window slightly open. I looked over to the window into the bedroom and saw it as it opened. I smiled and went over and closed it. Problem solved. I went into the bathroom to take a look, and of course there was no one in there. Plus the window was shut tight. I went back into preparing for the presentation. After about 15 minutes, I heard a rattling sound, and then the bathroom door creaked open again. I didn't like it, but I thought it wasn't too much of an issue. I went over and shut it once more. When it happened the third time, I gave up on closing it. If it's open, it can't irritate me, right? Well, that's what I thought at the time. However, the open door started swinging slowly, and then it slammed shut. It opened again and slammed shut. Okay, I can't do this anymore, I thought. Time to call the front desk. I asked to switch rooms, but I was refused quite impolitely. I was told the hotel was fully booked. It certainly didn't seem fully booked. I couldn't do much else. I mean, if the front desk says there aren't any other rooms, then I guess there aren't any other rooms, right? I didn't know the area I was in well enough to be running out and searching for another hotel. Plus, my company booked me to this hotel. How would it look if I ran out on it? With these thoughts in mind, I knew I would have to reluctantly return to my presentation. and other less frightening thoughts. I put the phone back on the receiver and started back to the desk when my legs felt trapped. I had no balance. I nearly flew headfirst into my suitcase. It felt as if someone had a hold of my legs, and if they tried to trip me. It was such a frightening feeling. Instinctively, I moved away from the bed. I didn't like the huge gap under it. Now I was starting to feel anxious and frightened, so I called a friend back home and told them what was going on, knowing they wouldn't laugh at me. And my friend gave me some advice. Do you have a Bible in your room? If you do, make friends with it tonight and keep it by your side. I laughed at this idea, but I fished around the bedside chest of drawers to see if there was a Bible, and to my surprise there was. I was flipping through it while chanting to my friend. I flicked through the pages and noticed something strange. In flashes, as the pages sped by, I saw a dark brownish-reddish stain. I felt sick, as I was certain it was blood. I closed the Bible and saw blood on the edges. You know the white bit around the sides of the pages where they meet? They were clearly blood splattered. I didn't know what happened in that room. I just knew I didn't want to be there any longer. I didn't care what my boss thought. I walked around until I found another hotel. Something was just very wrong there, and I'm thankful that I got away from it.
This happened when I was in my 5th year of elementary school. I had a younger sister who was in the 3rd grade at the time. We got along really well. We would often play outside, right outside our house, after school. We were playing badminton that day. It was summer and we were amidst the first onslaught of mosquitoes. There were a bunch about that day, and we weren't wearing any repellent, so we ran to the house to get some. "Mum, it's me. I'm just running upstairs to grab insect repellent, okay?" I shouted as we ran in the house. Then from the bathroom, near the front door I was stood at, came a reply. "Okay." I grabbed the bug spray, then ran back outside to keep playing with my sister, not giving it a second thought. However, about 10 minutes or so passed, and I saw Mum pulling into the driveway. It wasn't right. It couldn't be possible. I had just heard my mum call out from the bathroom. I got goosebumps, and my sister was freaked out too. How could this be? We both ran over to her and hugged her. We told her all about it, and it must have sounded a bit strange to her because even at that age, I could hardly believe what had happened. My sister backed me up though. She said she had heard what I had heard, which made it a bit more strange and a little creepy. So the downstairs bathroom, which previously had nothing frightening about it, became somewhere scary for my sister and I. We all went to check the bathroom. Me and my sister were hiding behind our mother as she opened the door. There was no one there. I checked time after time with my sister. I was sure I wasn't imagining it. She confirmed every time that she had heard a voice, which sounded just like my mum, say, "Okay." We were frightened of going to the bathroom alone. We used to go together, but then as time went by, we stopped thinking about it and grew less wary of the bathroom. I think about half a year had passed and my sister and I were home alone, waiting for Mum to come home. Watching the house was what we called it. I was watching TV and I noticed that my sister was stood in front of the bathroom. She turned to me with a frightened look on her face. She looked pale. "The bathroom door is locked," she whimpered. She got into a panic and went to run, but she smashed her arm on the corner of the wall by the stairs. She started to whine and her eyes became watery. Her bottom lip was trembling. We all know what was about to come next. So I wanted to calm her down and to show her that there was nothing to be scared of. "Come on, I'm sure the bathroom door is just stuck or something. Let's go have a look," I said. When I turned the door handle, the door wouldn't budge. There was another way to unlock the door with a key from the outside, so we did that. And again, there was no one inside. We were stood in shock, hearts racing, staring into the empty bathroom, when we heard a voice coming from the front door call out, "Hi, I'm back." It was Mum. Perfect timing.
We both had to tell her about what had happened. We raced over to the door to welcome her. Mum was nowhere to be seen. We were home alone with something which sounded like Mum in the house with us. I think we simultaneously realized this and just burst into tears. I remember thinking, if it was just only one of us who heard it, we could say to the other, "You're just hearing things," or "I didn't hear it." But no, we had both heard it, loud and clear. We didn't know what to do, so we just left the house and went to a nearby park. We couldn't stay in that house. Thankfully, some of the neighbor kids were there. They didn't believe our story though. We just decided to wait outside until Mum came home. As soon as we saw her car pull up, we ran over and blurted out what had happened. Years later, Mum admitted to us that she had heard voices in the house, found locked doors, etc. She didn't tell us because she didn't want to frighten us. My sister suffered with sleep paralysis in that house regularly. I now think something malevolent was targeting her. Either that, or I have a very low level of perception, and it was targeting us both. According to my sister, she could see black spots emanating from the walls in her bouts of sleep paralysis. Nowadays, my sister is married, and she doesn't get sleep paralysis anymore. I can still hear that voice, the voice of the Mum thing, in my head, so clearly. I get the shivers from time to time.
There was an inn in my hometown. It was built in the 80s when Japan's economy was skyrocketing. Leisure resorts and the tourism industry all thrived back then. After that period in our history, the inn suffered a decline in popularity, possibly due to increased tourism abroad and the fact that inns like this went out of style. Eventually, the lot and the inn were bought by a development company, and the inn finally and permanently closed its doors. Someone had heard that the plot was to be used to create a relaxation resort. The odd thing was that the company that bought the inn and the land went bust. History repeated itself, I guess. Before development could begin, their bubble burst. No company or anyone got involved with the inn and the plot of land, and therefore lay there derelict and only served a purpose, a gloomy monument to its former glory. The inn wasn't exactly in the public eye. Back in the day, there were signposts pointing guests towards it from the highway. Now, the darkness, weeds, and dense overgrowth had claimed the inn. If you weren't looking for it, you'd never find it. That in itself is a double-edged sword, I suppose. You wouldn't find a business sign for the inn nowadays. All you'll see is an ominous dark outline if you perchance glanced out your passenger side window as you drove past it. It was around this time when the rumors about the inn began to spread. There was no doubt the rumors were born from the fact that it had become a frightening-looking building, and not through any substantial evidence. In short, people said the place was haunted. One rumor started that the owner took his life when his business went under, and that if you went to visit, you may see his spirit at night. Another rumor said there was a murder that happened in the building. But of course, as we knew the real history of the inn, these were nothing but baseless rumors. I know that the owner sold the inn at the best possible chance before the bubble bursts, and that he was living very comfortably these days. There was no suicide or murder either. The locals usually know the stories which are behind abandoned buildings, but people who just see a derelict building presume they have the right to come up with their own truths. However, some of the locals have said that they have seen a pale light emanating from the inn, and that they have seen shadows pass by the window. That's pretty creepy, right? The owner of that mysterious shadow was likely an urban explorer, and that spooky glow of pale light, his flashlight. Because of rumors like this place has become supposedly haunted. It was actually featured in a magazine, and I couldn't believe it. The article interviewed an individual who had witnessed paranormal activity there. The interviewee was adamant that he saw an apparition in the inn. After this publicity, the inn gained a lot of popularity. Young people would turn up at all hours of the night, making noise and flashing their flashlights everywhere. It annoyed us locals so much that there were requests to demolish the building to stop the nuisance that it caused. Then as time went by, the day of the demolition came, and the creepy abandoned inn was no more. It was said that there would be a shopping center erected in its place. I don't know why, but I was kind of sad to see it go. I guess that seeing it daily for 10 years or so does that. A few days after the demolition work began, I saw police cars parked outside the abandoned inn. I wondered if there'd been a car accident or something. Later that night I was watching the local news and found out why the police cars were gathered there. You see, during the demolition, they found the skeletonized remains of a body. Initial reports concluded that the person had passed away between 6 to 10 years ago. Well, that coincides perfectly with when all the rumors began. I guess sometimes there is a truth in rumors. Perhaps they did see someone, and something paranormal was happening in that inn. But I'll never know for sure. It's certainly creepy though.
This happened when I was in Okinawa. I was in elementary school at the time. I was suffering from a terrible lack of sleep. This was because the house that I lived in was incredibly active. Strange and mysterious things were happening often back then. I was used to waking up in the middle of the night, like 1 or 2 a.m. The night in question was not unlike any other. I woke up at around 2 and tried my best to get back to sleep, and just as I felt I was drifting off, I heard something. It was a kind of tapping sound. It came from the direction of the kitchen. It sounded as if someone was messing around with the tableware. Something was distantly rumbling in there. And it wasn't the first time that I heard this. There should be no one in our kitchen at 2 a.m. It wasn't as if anyone in the family was a night owl. The sound continued. I had heard things like this before, but now they seemed to be escalating. I heard a low male voice mutter something, and from then on, I would wake up and hear the same things again and again. My parents would never believe me. One night, I woke up as usual in the middle of the night and desperately tried to get back to sleep before I heard any of those terrifying sounds, but I just couldn't. I heard the shaking of objects in the kitchen, drawers opening, and things toppling over in there. Then, as usual, I heard the distant sound of a male voice muttering, only this time it was slightly more audible. I was hiding beneath the covers as I realized it was getting closer to my bedroom. The voice got closer and clearer, and I was able to make out some words. "Come with me. Come with me," the voice repeated. It sounded like there was someone right beside my bedroom window. I was utterly terrified. I just hid beneath the covers and screwed up my eyes as tightly shut as I could. I did not want to see the owner of that horrible voice. I don't know how, but suddenly I had the courage to jump out of bed and run to my parents' room. I banged on their door and tried to open it, but they had locked it from the inside. I just remember crying and screaming until I had a response. They finally opened the door, and we still talk about that night. They said that I had a completely pale face. I told them that I had heard someone calling me to come with them outside, and then they let me sleep in their bed. Just as I was drifting off to sleep again, I heard the sound of banging at my parents' door. Naturally, I was terrified, but I was quickly relieved to see that it was just my younger brother who had woken up to see I wasn't in the room and came to find me. I was able to get to sleep now, but not for long. I was awoken by the sound of banging yet again at the door. There were no other members of my family out there. We were all in my parents' room. This meant that there was something else out there, and I didn't like thinking about that. The volume of the banging rose louder and louder. It wasn't knocking. It was more like it was trying to break the door down. I was scared, and I looked towards my mother to see if she was awake. She was. I looked her in the eyes, and she just put a finger to her mouth and said, "Shh." I knew that they were aware of the phenomenon at that point. They had just never said anything. They weren't doing anything about it either. I kind of hated them in that moment. Then, one morning, I came downstairs to see my dad looking pale. He looked troubled. He told me about it many years later. He said he'd been suffering with sleep paralysis. He said he awoke to the sound of religious chanting. He looked around and saw someone in robes sat near him, reciting scripture. He said it was the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to him. He heard familiar voices crying in the background. It was his family and friends. He said it felt like he was attending his own funeral. He tried to scream, and that was when he eventually was able to wake up and move his body. My father was living in fear since that day. It wasn't too long after when a priest visited our home to purify it. Soon after, for other reasons, we moved. In our new home, my sleeping pattern improved dramatically. We were friends with the person who rented the house after us. He was one of my dad's work colleagues, and he said he had seen something disturbing in that house. He said he saw a wartime soldier stood outside the window of mine and my brother's old room. I don't know if there is still any paranormal activity happening in that house, but I don't ever want to go back there.
This happened around 10 years ago, and is something that regularly plays on my mind. I think it happened just past 1 a.m. I was falling asleep, but then I was awoken by the sound of something heavy and metallic clanking against something. It was stressful to be woken up like that, and I was laying in bed wondering what had happened. Not 30 seconds had passed when I heard the sound again. Since I had another chance to hear the sound, I now thought that it sounded like a metal pole or rod smashing against something heavy and dense. It continued. It seemed like it was occurring every 30 seconds or so. I had to take a look outside. It was so weird, and I was very curious. My bedroom was on the second floor, and it faced the street. I lived in a residential area back then. It was usually very quiet, especially this late at night. We didn't get much noise from traffic passing either, so it was very odd. I was looking out the window, and for a while I couldn't even figure out where the noise was coming from. It looked as if there were no one on the streets. Well, that's what I thought, until I spotted a figure standing in the middle of the road about 3 houses away. It was a man. He was slightly illuminated between the yellow streetlights. I wondered if he lived in one of the houses that he stood in front of. I hadn't seen him before, and based on the way he stood like a statue in the street, I wouldn't mind not seeing him again either. He was creeping me out. At the man's feet were about 5 garbage bags, all black. They seemed to surround him. It was strange because in our area, we were told by the council to use a yellowish garbage bag. The trash collection workers said if they were not in a yellow bag, they wouldn't take them. This, to me, was a red flag. This is where things get really weird. I thought at one point the garbage bags he was standing over sort of looked like a body. I must have stared at the man for about 10 to 15 minutes, and he didn't move a muscle. The metal sound stopped after a while, and I was too tired to figure out what was happening there, so I went to bed. I woke up the next morning late for work and headed out in a rush. It wasn't until dark when I returned. Just as I was turning my key in the lock, I remembered the events of the night before. My brain literally said, "What was going on with the guy last night under the streetlight?" I looked across at the home that the man was seemingly stood in front of. Strange thing was, it was pitch black out, and I couldn't see the house I had seen the night before. I was freaked out because I knew I saw the man last night standing in front of a house on my street. Now I couldn't even make out where it was he once stood. Then I figured out why I couldn't see him. There was no streetlight anywhere near that house. I ran upstairs and looked out my window thinking that my eyes had deceived me. But when I pulled the curtain back, my spine went ice cold. There was no streetlight opposite that house. I don't care what anyone says. I saw that man under a yellow streetlight in front of the house. I know it wasn't a dream, and I still have no idea how that happened. All I know is that my life went downhill fast after I laid eyes on him. If anyone has any theories, I'm all ears. I can't get that night out of my head.
This happened when I stayed in a cheap hotel in Ueno. I was visiting Tokyo to attend an old friend's wedding. The hotel was only a few minutes' walk from the train station. It was just a simple, smallish business hotel on the outskirts of the downtown area. Since the hotel was old, the interior design and the room were pretty old. The room key had the old cylinder-style lock. I was more used to the modern card key, and you don't really see locks like that these days. When I first got into the elevator, I noticed that it creaked and made a heck of a noise. It was also really slow too. When I got into my room, I was surprised to see that it was cleaner than I had expected. One downside was that there was this weird musty odor, but I guess that just came with the territory. I didn't care. The room was cheap and clean. I dropped my luggage and lay down on the bed. I heard a rattling noise as I did. Must have come from next door. Man, these walls are thin, I thought. I called my fiancée to let her know I arrived safely, and this is how the conversation went to the best of my recollection. "I'm here." I can't really complain, you get what you pay for, right? My partner then fell silent. The conversation felt a bit awkward. "What's the matter?" "I think it's just me." "What makes you ask?" "Hey, don't try and freak me out. It's probably just the thin walls." "Oh yeah, 'cause I'm such a big hit with the ladies." "Yeah, don't worry." In the end, I managed to joke my way out of this peculiar accusation, and we made up, said our goodnights, and things were back to normal again. The hotel room fell silent after the call. It was quite eerie, and I felt an unexpected sense of loneliness. It was just a stifling sense of isolation, like I was the last human on Earth. What had brought this all on? Maybe I was spinning too many plates at once. Work, love life, planning a wedding, I don't know. This seems like a simple excuse though. I hadn't ever felt like that before, or since. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I'm usually the type who can sleep anywhere. As soon as my head hits the pillow, I'm usually out for the count, but not that night. I just felt uncomfortable in every position I lay in. I felt like checking social media sites on my phone. I grabbed it and noticed one of my other apps had been running, the voice memo app. This wasn't that unusual since I used the app all the time for work, especially in meetings. I must have hit record by accident, I guess. I realized what had been recorded was my conversation with my fiancée. I listened back to it, and right before she asked me if anyone was in the room with me, I heard something strange. It sounded like whispering. I definitely heard something, faint though it was. It was something. I turned up the volume and played it back again. I heard a voice. A female voice. I turned up the volume to the max, and I couldn't believe what I heard. How is this possible? It was some mindless voice repeating this over and over again, like some monotone chant. Let's die together. Let's die together. Let's die together. Chills raced up my spine as I heard those words. I held down the voice memo note and hit delete. It was still playing as I was deleting it. As I deleted it off of my phone, I heard, It came from inside the room, for sure. Even though it was past midnight, I grabbed my suitcase and ran downstairs. I left the hotel. I got another one, a more modern one. I just had to bite the bullet on the price. Nothing else really came of that night. I guess I can't complain. I spoke to a friend who's into the paranormal, and he said it was lucky that I was heading to a wedding. He said that the spirit, if it had attached to me, might have found joy in the celebration of life. He said I should be thankful I wasn't going to a funeral. Anyways, that's the last time I stay in a cheap old hotel to save a few bucks.
Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so very, very much for listening. I really hope that you liked tonight's stories. It's always fun to do stories from different countries. We rarely have any stories from Japan, so it really is a nice treat, at least for me, to, read them and get different perspectives culturally and stuff. So yeah, I really hope you liked them. A huge thank you, of course, to Jay Nightmares, who provided me with all the stories, and who narrated half of the stories as well. He's just an awesome narrator and guy, and if you'd like to hear more stories from Japan, he does a whole lot of it, so you can check out his channel. It's some really cool stuff. I really enjoy it. Well, thank you, everyone. If you want to see more from him, you can find a link on screen now and in the description. Please don't forget that if you want to contribute to the app campaign, you can, and it means the world to me. But for now, stay awesome. Also, thanks to my members and patrons and coffee supporters. I love you so much. And I'll see you in the next one.